There is, of course, still one to be done. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. We have been asking him for weeks now to give us a date, a time, a venue. As of now, none has been forthcoming. No broadcaster can compel a politician to be interviewed, but leaders' interviews have been a key part of the BBC's primetime election coverage for decades. We do them on your behalf to scrutinise and hold to account those who would govern us. That is democracy. We've always proceeded in good faith that the leaders would participate, and in every election they have. All of them, until this one. It is not too late. We have an interview prepared, oven ready, as Mr. Johnson likes to say. The theme running through our questions is trust, and why at so many times in his career in politics and journalism, critics and sometimes even those close to him have deemed him to be untrustworthy. It is, of course, relevant to what he is promising us all now. Can he be trusted to deliver 50,000 more nurses when almost 20,000 in his numbers are already working for the NHS? He promises 40 new hospitals, but only 6 are scheduled to be built by 2025. Can he be believed when he claims another 34 will be built in the 5 years after that? Can he be trusted to fund the NHS properly when he uses a cash figure of an extra £34 billion? After inflation, the additional money promised amounts to £20 billion. He vows that the NHS will not be on the table in any trade talks with America. But he vowed to the DUP, his unionist allies in Northern Ireland, that there would never be a border down the Irish Sea. That is as important to the DUP as the NHS is to the rest of us. It is a vow his Brexit deal would seem to break. Now he tells us he's always been an opponent of austerity. We would ask him for evidence of that. And we would want to know why an opponent of austerity would bake so much of it into their future spending plans. We would ask why, as with the proposed increase in police numbers, so many of his promises only take us back to the future, back to where we were before austerity began. Social care is an issue of growing concern. On the steps of Downing Street in July, he said he'd prepared a plan for social care. We'd ask him why that plan is not in his manifesto. Questions of trust. Questions we'd like to put to Mr. Johnson so you can hear his replies. But we can't, because he won't sit down with us. There is no law, no Supreme Court ruling that can force Mr. Johnson to participate in a BBC leader's interview. But the Prime Minister of our nation will, at times, have to stand up to President Trump, President Putin, President Xi of China. So it was surely not expecting too much that he spent half an hour standing up to me.
This is literally a newsman on the BBC, British Broadcasting, I forget the last part, but British television, begging the Prime Minister for an interview. The Prime Minister has been avoiding Andrew Neil like the plague. Neil, who has just put out a litany of things that the Prime Minister has been lying about, disingenuous about, or breaching any bounds of rational human being looking at it, calling it the truth. Boris Johnson has an issue with honesty. The things that he say oftentimes are out of alignment with reality. He may not be as flagrant as Trump, but I got to be honest, do you necessarily even want to be in that orbit? He lies as easily as he breathes. And this brings home this kind of very clear picture of, do you believe what he says, especially in the context of the NHS? Andrew Neil has a point. I could add a few more. The Skripal poisoning. He mentioned the bus that was riding around talking about all of this money that was going to go back into the British coffers. In the Skripal poison, he goes to Portadown, talks to somebody there. He comes out and says, this lab guy at this research organization for chemical weapons has just told me, Boris Johnson, that the Russians did it. Now, the media immediately goes to the guy who Boris Johnson says told him that. And that guy says, I have no idea what he is talking about. He just lied. It didn't bother him in the least. He should have been censured for that. That's a big deal considering this was the country that went along with the weapons of mass destruction nonsense. He flagrantly blamed another country for something using this poor lab guy who didn't tell him anything of the such. The get Brexit done stuff. I'm going to be out by October 31st. You're not out. That was a lie, or at the very least he was being disingenuous. He fully understood that most likely he would end up in a general election, which is where we are. His argument, however, was not for general election. His argument was, I'm going to get Brexit done by October 31st. It wasn't true. Most likely it was not going to be true because there was going to be all sorts of oppositions going against him. He's also not dead in a ditch. Bojo has a problem with honesty when he's attacking Corbyn, talking about Corbyn jumped to the side of the Russians. Even that relationship that he had with that woman where money was going into her coffers while he was in a relationship with her. A woman, not his wife, or not his girlfriend, I'm sorry. Or at the time, I guess she was his girlfriend. I guess my point is this. Bojo has a history of being flagrantly, running in the daylight, no shirt on, dishonest. And when he makes these proclamations of, you can trust me, I'm not going to sell off the NHS, like right here, he's ruling it out. You can trust me, I'm Bojo. I'm not.
Categorically rule out that any part of the NHS will be on the table in any trade negotiation.
Including
pharmaceuticals. This is pure Loch Ness Monster.
It's Loch Ness Monster stuff. It's Loch Ness Monster stuff. Now, when you listen to Trump says something different. Listen to Trump with Theresa May. Listen to this.
I think everything with the trade deal is on the table. When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that. But everything will be on the table, absolutely.
Did you see a smile at the end of that? Oh, it's like a vulture ready to get down with his dinner. Everything is on the table in a trade deal. Why wouldn't it be on the table in a trade deal? You have a country that is coming out of a trading bloc. While it was in the context of that trading bloc, it had a certain weight that it could throw around the world, and now it is by itself and it is in a submissive position. The capitalistic impulse is to maximize profit. You have an entity that is now in a submissive position that needs your pharmaceuticals, needs your drugs. Why wouldn't you increase the price? Why wouldn't you try to get your hands on the NHS, especially if there are things that the UK need, just basically to get by? They need that trade deal. The United States knows they need that trade deal. The UK knows they need that trade deal. And depending upon how the deal is sweetened and how the US presses, are you telling me, are you honestly believing that the United States and the companies that are in the United States that are putting money into the pockets of these politicians are not going to have these politicians to take a perspective that allows them to get their hands on your socialized medicine? I hate to tell you this, but your NHS has been privatized over the last several years, going back to the Blairites, the New Labour, all the way up until the point of the Conservatives. And it will only get worse as you get that much weaker within the context of a trading process. Now, realizing that this is somewhat of a problem for Bojo, his buddy, Trump, comes out and says this.
No, not at all. I have nothing to do with it. Never even thought about it. Honestly, we have enough. Look, we are going to have a great healthcare system. We're doing great healthcare work. We've got things really running well. And if we get elected, if we take the House, keep the Senate, keep the White House, we'll have phenomenal healthcare. But right now, we've made it very good. And we have 180 million people on plans that they absolutely love, private plans that they absolutely love.
Now, this is, of course, lunacy. Donald Trump, again, lies as easily as he does breathe. I've never seen a person lie this much in regards to political affairs. So when you see Donald Trump talk, most of the time, he's not telling the truth. Right here, do you honestly believe that the United States would have pushed through Obamacare and then still continuously be talking about healthcare, and healthcare being the number one issue that is on the minds of people in this country. If what Trump is saying here is right, then what I just said will be false. And what I just said there is true. Americans die younger. Infant mortality rates worse. And honestly, when you're looking at costs, we pay twice as much than anywhere else in the world for less care. For less care. So, to put it in context, what he's saying here is not true. We are getting raped from the standpoint of healthcare, and he's acting like it's all fun and games. In fact, if it was up to him, he would have taken the healthcare away from 20 million additional people. This is a farce. And yet he sits up here and says this stuff. Now, he's saying this in defense, to some degree, of Bojo. Let him get around to Bojo.
But in this country, no, they have to work that out for themselves. We have absolutely, I don't even know where that rumor started. We have absolutely nothing to do with it, and we wouldn't want to. If you handed it to us on a silver platter, we want no.
We want nothing to do with it, even if you handed it over to a silver platter. Do you believe that? I don't even know where that rumor got started. That rumor got started from you on stage with Theresa May saying yes, with a Cheshire grin, fork and knife. Yes, everything is over the table. The NHS is on the table, including other things. But yes, lustily said, the NHS is on the table. What's true? This is Dominique Raab. Listen to him.
Reducing barriers to trade on both sides is a win-win. It increases business activity. It's good for businesses and creating the jobs of the future. But it also gives the consumer a better deal because they've got cheaper prices and greater choice.
Just to take drugs, as I understand it, we can't guarantee when we leave the European Union that we will pay the same amount for American drugs in future, that they might decide to jack up the price. Is that right?
Well, look, the Americans will take their decisions, but what we're saying
Which could be to jack up the price.
Well, no, I think it's hugely unlikely. Why would they do that? What's the interest?
Well, get more money.
Think about what he just said. Think about what he just said. He said, will Americans have the potential to jack up the price? He says, look, what Americans do is what Americans do. The answer is yes. I'm telling you, I live here. We pay twice as much. It's not because we love it. It's because certain corporations can make massive amounts of profit off of it. This is the healthcare system, and we don't have a political solution or a political apparatus that is attentive to what we want in this sense. The corporations that pay the politicians that are going to be doing the trade deal with you are going to be out for similar gains to make inroads into what you have as a socialized system that they abhor. They hate it. Your socialized medicine stops them from being able to charge you 2 and 3 and 4 times as much like they do here. When asked, why would they do that? At the very least acknowledges that we will do that. And he said, why would they do that? To make more profits is the most rational, insane thing in the world. Meaning Bojo saying it is categorically off the table is nonsense. If you want a trade deal and if you need a trade deal, what is going to be on the table is the NHS. Privatizing various aspects of the NHS in addition to paying more for drugs. That is going to be the starting position of the United States, and that will be the position that make inroads in your country. Because I guarantee you this, Bojo, Rob, and the other Tories are just like the Tories or conservatives in this country. Our country is more rapacious in this sense, but your people are similar. Given the opportunity, they will do that. It is within their philosophy to do that. It will not be one fell swoop. It won't be a knife that takes down the NHS all in one. It will be just like it has been over the last decade, chipping away at the NHS, your healthcare service. You better protect that healthcare service. This election will boil down to 2 points. 1, the destruction of the NHS. 2, undoing Brexit. For Tories, this election may be straightforward. They are within their political philosophy. We wanted to leave for God knows how long. This is the guy that's going to get us out. We're leaving. For Labour, it's more difficult, especially if you're one of those Labour members that wanted to leave. And what it looks like is that the Labour position is a de facto Brexit, meaning they don't believe it. And because they don't believe in it, they're not going to do anything in order to make that work. And more likely than not, they are going to give you this fraudulent, fuck democracy, secondary referendum to try to give a patina of legitimacy to something where they, for the most part, flagrantly dragged out and then ultimately ignored the referendum result. If you're a Labour member who wanted to leave, that bites, that stings. By the same token, I would imagine that being a Labour member, you also prize that NHS. I don't consider this an easy choice. Labour has been gaining on the Conservatives' lead in this. And whether or not Labour outperforms, I got to be honest, I hope I am wrong on what I'm saying here, in the sense that I think it's an albatross around Jeremy Corbyn's neck to have to run in a race that may entirely be about Brexit in regards to the way that people vote, when all of these other secondary issues should matter. And yet the thing that seems to matter and is sticking is Brexit. I hope I'm wrong. After all, you have a prime minister that is literally running from an interview because of all of the lies and the falsehoods that have circled, even just within the context of him being prime minister. And Neil ran through a litany of them. And Neil wanted to ask him about him. Because how he answers those questions and the fact that he's been flagrantly dishonest over the course of the time as prime minister and even through his career matters when he says things like, I categorically say I'm not going to put the NHS on the table. I'm telling you, he is being dishonest with you, just like he's been dishonest with you over the last few months. This is the same prime minister running and jumping literally into a freezer to get away from questions from Piers Morgan. They tell one of the other people to fuck off, and then Bojo jumps into a freezer to
Morning,
escape.
Prime Minister. Will you come on Good Morning Britain, Prime Minister?
He just told the guy to fuck off.
I just had a reaction here from one of the minders. Okay, don't push, thanks very much.
On his face.
Wow.
That minder.
You're not getting near Boris. Look at
Prime
that.
Minister, will you come on Good Morning Britain and deliver on your promise to talk to Piers and Susanna? We're ready to go. We're live on ITV right now. Prime Minister, we have an earpiece in my pocket. You're more than welcome to come on. I'm actually being pushed.
In the freezer. He jumped in the freezer. He's that terrified of an interview. Now, I have to ask you as a rational human being who looks at that. The person who wants to lead your country and go through the fires of an election, because at this point, Boris hasn't been elected by anybody. At the very least, from the standpoint of Prime Minister, it's only been Tories. This will be his election where he is bathed in the fires of the public's point of view. And he has been doing everything in his power, up and including jumping into a freezer to avoid public scrutiny. Severe public scrutiny that would take place if he was running in the United States. He would get that scrutiny in spades. And his jumping into a freezer wouldn't be something that would be allowed. There's no candidate in the United States that would have done that. And yet Bojo does that. And for whatever reason, this is okay. Because in this particular election, it boils down to Brexit. And the fact that the Prime Minister doesn't want to be scrutinized matters, unfortunately, less. Matters less. In 2 days, there will be an election. And I gotta be honest, my vote in this would go to Corbyn. Not because it will be an easy vote, but more so because I think, at the very least, to some degree, he's authentic. And this other one, I don't. I don't trust Bojo as far as I can throw him. And the fact that he has a flagrant history of lying, the fact that he is terrified of actually sitting down for a full-blown interview should concern you in regards to what he is telling you is going to take place if he wins that election with the majorities that he wants. He's untethered at that point. Just because you put a guy in order to do Brexit, he will be doing other things after Brexit, and the negotiations for that Brexit will go on for years. And as the selling off of the NHS takes place, he will tell you breathlessly that what he said before somehow wasn't breached, despite the fact that it's been breached. Meaning you caught him into a lie a few years later when you find out that the NHS had been sold off and the deal had already, to some degree, in part, been agreed to earlier. Probably around this time in those documents. Destruction of the NHS or Brexit. Those are the two choices. And fact of the matter is the destruction of the NHS, saving the NHS in this case, to some degree means selecting a person who may not deliver on Brexit, who probably won't deliver on Brexit, and will give it a patina of public choice, despite the fact that the public already chose. And one party, the Labour Party, is ignoring that choice. It is not an easy vote. And I have to be honest, the fact that even I would have qualms about this, in the standpoint of this vote, especially if Brexit was my priority. And for me, I think the referendum is the priority, less about Brexit. It didn't matter what the referendum was. I think it would be more so my issue. The public chose and won in the party who said they were going to represent that or back that choice, meaning Labour. They might have a softer Brexit, but they would have went along with the Brexit, has for the most part ignored that. By the same token, the Tory party is not to be trusted, not one iota, especially in regard to the NHS, and especially when they're in a submissive position from the standpoint of trade deals. He's lying to you. He's not telling you the truth, just like he hasn't told you the truth before. And for me, this will boil down more so to the NHS. That's just the way I think. Not to mention, you can't trust Bojo. I think the referendums will be catastrophic again if the Remainers win in that. All hell will break loose because, again, you've essentially allowed a political position of slowing down and dragging out the process where you can finally get to a position of lopping off the head of the thing that you didn't particularly like. Well, that's, like I said, that's problematic to me. It's problematic to me. By the same token, let's just be very clear. And by the way, this is what you're fighting for. This is Brits being told about U.S. healthcare.
10 grand for a baby.
Is there a price for that?
Yes.
Jeez, $100, $200?
$2.5 grand.
$80.
600.
250.
More.
Shut the fridge.
More.
£300.
Double it.
$600. $600.
Yeah.
Do you know that if you were in the hospital, you got a Tylenol, in one of the bills we had Tylenols for $20 each? Think about that. You're in a position where they can essentially mark up the price. $20 for like a Tylenol in the hospital. They're shocked by this because they don't pay at the point of service. And so when they hear how much, how do they expect people to live off of that? How on earth can they charge somebody that? What the American companies are able to charge for that. They look at you and they think fertile ground, fertile territory. We can expand, we can maximize our profit. We'll be able to charge them more from the standpoint of pharmaceuticals, even some of the services we may be able to privatize and get our hands on it. You are only fertile territory. You are just land to be conquered. An economic incentive that drives the political space in order to get their hands on your healthcare service. And the conservatives that are in power right now, who have the same philosophy of sorts, will allow them to do so because they, in some part, agree with them. every incentive in the world from the standpoint of the Tories and the standpoint of the American companies and the people who are in power that are making those decisions go into getting their hands on your healthcare service, with the exception of one, that the public doesn't want them to. But the public in this country don't want to pay $600 or $20 for an aspirin or twice or 3 times as much than the rest of the population. We don't like that, and yet it happens.
Ambulance call out. How much do you think that costs?
Zero payment.
Zero payment?
Yeah, zero payment.
No. Because $2,500.
For real?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
you look.
It's shocking. It's shocking. I'll leave it on this part. When I was abroad and I was traveling and I would bump into, I had the opportunity or misfortune of tanking on the four-wheeler. I had to get medical care, meaning I had to stop in the various places in order to get either medication or something else. I remember even for one of my other issues, I had to stop at a pain clinic in Israel, of all places, and they had to write me a prescription. The prices are dramatically cheaper. So, for example, one pill, one drug that I was taking, they have it here. It's a neuropathy drug, but Lyrica, that's it. I could buy Lyrica over the counter in Egypt and have boatloads of it and enough of it to travel to last me from the time that I left Egypt all the way to the time I came back home. Dirt cheap. My insurance company would not even fill the prescription here and recommended another drug because they didn't want to deal with the price. Dirt cheap compared to what it's in the US. Even from the standpoint of things like Tramadol or things like gabapentin, all this stuff. Much, much cheaper than whatever you'd get in the United States, even in some cases with insurance. Protect your NHS. That is my only advice. This is not to say the vote for one person or the other. It is to say that just understand that in that vote, there is risk on both sides. Risk from the standpoint of the NHS or risk from the standpoint of not getting Brexit in the way that Labour goes about undermining the referendum. I want Corbyn to win. I want Corbyn to win. By the same token, I understand the difficulty of Labour in dealing with this result. Donald Smead, how easy would it be for Bojo to rig the election? Well, so Bojo has been doing some of the similar things that conservatives have been doing here in the U.S. This notion of putting constraints on the ability for people to vote, screaming about voter fraud and all this other nonsense. Again, I can tell you from the conservatives in the United States, it's nonsense. They do that to suppress the vote because conservatives tend to have a better chance of winning, at the very least in the United States, when the vote total is lower. We're your darker brother. We're your darker brother. Like, share, subscribe. Who are you to question the market, Jamal? God, no. I know, right? I know. The market allocates this stuff in a pure, proper way. It's like the hand of God. For example, when we were in Richmond and there was a hurricane, and the hurricane knocked out all of the water in the power plants and all that other stuff, and we had to kind of live on reserve power and whatnot, even in the hospital. I was in a hospital at the time. People were selling water for $20, $30, $40 because there was no water. And the market allocated the price of water to be more expensive. And so people who needed water could just go and die. And the people who couldn't afford it can get it. Fucking market rules. The market rules. Like, share, subscribe.